Have you ever encountered something that defied all logic? I'm James, and one night on the A106 led me to meet a shadowy entity that changed my life forever. Prepare to feel a chill down your spine. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more terrifying stories. The night was cold and foggy, wrapped in an unsettling silence. As I drove along the A106, my thoughts wandered, immersed in the fatigue of a long day at work. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly, surrounded by dense forests and desolate fields. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with a sense of anticipation that I couldn't quite identify. The whispers of the wind intertwined with the noises of the engine, creating a strange melody that echoed in the cabin. I remembered stories I'd heard about this road, legends of unexplained sightings and shadowy figures that roamed at night. I'd always considered these stories mere superstitions of truckers on the brink of madness, but as the fog thickened, I began to wonder if there was something more. As I advanced, silhouettes began to form at the edge of the road, shadows that disappeared quickly as soon as I tried to focus on them. My heart raced, but I tried to attribute it all to fatigue. I'm just imagining things, I thought, trying to convince myself as I gripped the steering wheel tightly. But the truth is, there was something different about that night. A sense of discomfort settled over me. The trees seemed to lean in as if they were closing in, and the road suddenly seemed like an endless labyrinth. Each curve revealed a new level of darkness, and the air became heavier, almost oppressive. It was then, as I rounded a sharp bend, that I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, motionless and silent. My heart stopped for a moment. It was an indistinct silhouette, enveloped in thick fog, and I couldn't discern whether it was a man or a woman. The figure seemed to float, like a shadow cast by the moonlight. I slowed down, trying to understand what was happening. It's just a mirage, I told myself, but the figure did not disappear. Instead, it stayed there, defying logic and reason. The instinct to flee took over me, but something kept me in place. It was as if she was calling me. Adrenaline began to pump through my veins, and on impulse, I decided I needed to know what it was. I approached slowly, the headlights of the car illuminating the figure that seemed more real with each passing second. The fog swirled around it, as if it were alive, and for a brief moment, the figure turned to face me. Her eyes, or what seemed to be eyes, were deep and dark, like abysses, and I felt a wave of terror mixed with a strange attraction. But as soon as our gazes met, she disappeared as quickly as she had appeared, leaving only the mist and a vast emptiness behind. The shock paralyzed me. I was alone on the road, surrounded by a terrifying silence, and the reality of what I had seen began to seep into my mind. What was that figure? What did she want from me? The answer remained in the shadows, as elusive as the entity itself that I had encountered. The car stopped on the road, my heart still racing, pounding in a frenetic rhythm. The silence that followed the sight of the figure was deafening. The thick fog enveloped the vehicle, creating a veil that seemed to hide everything around me. The reality of what I had witnessed began to settle in my mind, but logic still struggled to hold firm. It was a hallucination, I thought, trying to rationalize what had happened. But the truth was, I wasn't so sure. What I had seen was more than a mere illusion. Something inside me knew that there was something deeply wrong, and the feeling that I wasn't alone on the road intensified with each passing second. Still in shock, I started the car forward, accelerating towards home, hoping that the familiarity of my house would drive away the feeling of terror. However, as I drove, everything seemed different. Shadows danced on the sides of the road, and the wind seemed to whisper in a language I didn't understand. With each curve, the memory of the figure haunted me, like a ghost, that couldn't be ignored. The following nights became a true torment. The figure returned in my dreams, a dark presence that watched me but never spoke. I woke up in panic, my body drenched in cold sweat, my heart beating erratically. The visions became increasingly vivid, flooding my mind with horrifying images that left me on the brink of madness. The days dragged on, and reality seemed to slowly fade away. My work began to suffer the consequences. The lack of sleep and accumulated stress left me unable to concentrate. My colleagues noticed the change in my behavior, but I felt unable to share the truth. How could I explain that a shadowy entity was haunting me? The fear of being considered crazy was paralyzing. The pressure began to build. One day, while driving, I saw a shadow move quickly across the road, only to disappear the next instant. The shock almost made me lose control of the car. I knew I needed answers, that I couldn't live like this, trapped in a cycle of terror and despair. Desperate, I began to investigate the origins of the A106. The legends surrounding that road were many, and the figure I had encountered seemed to be a constant in various stories. I went to the local library, delving into old newspapers and witness accounts. What I found was disturbing. Other drivers reported similar encounters, and many of them did not survive to tell the tale. What was that entity? Why did it appear to me? With each new piece of information, the feeling that I was being pulled into an abyss intensified. It was as if the road was alive, and I was just another victim of its curse. It was on a particularly restless night that I decided to face my fear. With a heavy heart, I returned to the A106, determined to confront the entity that had changed my life forever. The road, now enveloped in thick fog, seemed to call me, as if it knew I was returning. With each kilometer traveled, the tension increased. The trees around seemed to lean in, and the wind whispered promises of terror. I was about to discover the truth, but the question that haunted me was I prepared for what that meant? The night was wrapped in an unsettling silence as I drove along the A106. The dense fog made everything more ominous, and the shadows danced on the sides of the road as if they wanted to warn me about something I couldn't yet understand. My heart pounded in an accelerated rhythm, and the memory of the ghostly figure haunted me like a shadow I couldn't escape. In the days that followed my return to the road, reality transformed into a nightmare. Every night as I closed my eyes, the entity reappeared, its oppressive presence filling every space of my being. The nightmares were vivid, filled with terrifying images that left me screaming in despair. The figure that had once been an indiscernible silhouette now became a threatening presence with eyes that seemed to burn in the darkness. Work became increasingly difficult. I couldn't concentrate, and my colleagues began to notice the changes in my behavior. "James, are you okay?" a concerned voice asked me one morning, but I just shook my head, unable to share what was really happening. The fear of being considered crazy was unbearable, and the idea that no one would believe me kept me silent. The isolation I had chosen became a prison. During the day, I tried to move forward, but at night, the terror returned. An endless cycle of fear and pain. With each nightmare, the figure became clearer, more real. I knew I needed to understand what was happening, but the idea of facing the truth left me paralyzed. One night, after a particularly stressful day, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. With a heavy heart, I did what I never thought I would. I returned to the A106, determined to confront the entity. The road was enveloped in thick fog, and the air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The headlights of the car illuminated the road ahead, but the darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. As I drove, the visions began to intensify. Silhouettes moved in the shadows, and I heard whispers that seemed to drift through the fog. Fear turned into a sense of desperation, and the idea that I was being watched intensified. Every shadow became a threat, every whisper a promise of terror. As I rounded a curve, a familiar presence materialized on the road. It was the figure I had seen before, standing still and motionless, as if it had been waiting for me. My heart raced, and the struggle between logic and fear became unbearable. "I can't do this," I murmured to myself. But it was too late. I slowed the car, stopping a few meters from the figure. The air was heavy, and the silence was almost deafening. The creature seemed more defined now, its eyes glowing with an intensity that hypnotized me. I was paralyzed, unable to move my muscles, caught between the need to flee and the curiosity that drew me closer. "You are here," it whispered, and the voice was like a distant echo reverberating in my mind. "You cannot ignore me. You are destined to find me." The words cut through the fear, penetrating my soul. Suddenly, everything became clear. The entity was not just a terrifying presence. It was a part of me, a representation of my own demons. The grief, guilt, and pain I carried were materialized before me. The realization hit me like a blow. I wasn't just facing a supernatural entity, I was facing the truth about myself. "I am not afraid of you," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling but firm. "If you are a part of me, then I need to understand why you are here." The words came out as a challenge, and the figure began to dissipate, but not before leaving a final message echoing in my heart. "Face your pain, James. Only then will you find freedom." With that, the figure disappeared into the fog, and the road fell silent. What I had learned was that the true battle was only just beginning. I needed to face not just the entity, but everything that had kept me a prisoner for so long. Determined to understand the truth I had encountered, I began to investigate the history of the A106. The feeling that there was something deeper at play consumed me. After the apparition, the need for answers became an obsession. What did the figure mean? Why was it connected to me? What else did the road hide? The next day, after a night filled with nightmares, I decided to visit the local library. The dusty books and ancient documents seemed to promise secrets that could set me free. The librarian, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, noticed my anxious gaze. "Looking for something specific?" she asked, her voice soft but with a tone that indicated she knew more than she let on. "Stories about the A106, I replied, feeling my heart race. "Legends, sightings, anything." She nodded slowly, leading me to a forgotten section of the library. The volumes were old, their covers worn by time. As I examined the titles, I found a book titled The Mysteries of the A106, Legends and Whispers. The title made my stomach churn, and I knew I had found what I needed. Inside the book, accounts of sightings and inexplicable experiences unfolded before me. One story in particular caught my attention. It told of a driver who, like me, had seen a ghostly figure on the road. He also began to have nightmares and visions, and his life crumbled before he could understand what he had encountered. "Those who see the entity are doomed to a cycle of torment," the text read. "The only way to break the curse is to confront the pain that the entity represents." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. The connection between my experience and the story written there was undeniable. The entity was not just a supernatural phenomenon, it was a reflection of my own demons. Determined to face my pain, I began to explore what it truly meant to confront the figure. I had to unearth the memories I had buried, relive the moments of loss that kept me a prisoner. The idea of doing this was terrifying but also liberating. The search for answers was not just a matter of understanding the entity, but a journey to understand myself. With the book in hand, I returned home. With each page I read, the feeling that something was moving within me grew. The stories of others who had faced the entity inspired me and gave me courage. If they could do it, so can I thought, deciding that I would not let fear dominate me again. That night, I prepared a space in my living room. With candles lit and a tranquil environment, I sat in silence, trying to connect with the part of me that had been lost for so long. The darkness seemed denser than ever, but there was a new determination in my heart. I was ready to face the truth. As the fog began to form outside the window, I felt that the entity was near. It was no longer just a terrifying figure. Now, it was a symbol of what I needed to confront. With heavy breathing, I closed my eyes and focused, ready to face whatever was lurking in the shadows. The silence in the room was almost deafening, and the only light that illuminated my face came from the flickering candles. Each shadow seemed to intensify, dancing on the walls as if it were alive. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and a penetrating cold began to infiltrate the environment as if the entity itself was approaching. My breathing became irregular. What I had feared had become palpable. I thought of everything I had lost: my wife, my son, and how the pain had turned into an unbearable burden. It was time to confront this pain, to face the entity that had become a symbol of my loss. With a deep sigh, I opened my eyes and focused on the intention to connect with the figure. "If you are here, appear!" I shouted, my voice firm but anxiety still pulsing in my chest. "I am no longer afraid of you." The air around me seemed to vibrate, and a mist began to form, filling the space with a familiar presence. The figure emerged, in front of me, clearer than ever. Its eyes were deep, like abysses that reflected all the pain I had felt. "You have come," the entity said, its voice a distant echo that reverberated in my mind. "Finally, you are ready to listen." Its words pierced like a sharp blade. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why do you torment me?" The answer did not come immediately, but the figure began to approach, its features more distinct. It was a mix of beauty and terror, and the feeling that we were connected was undeniable. I am the manifestation of your pain," it declared, its voice resonating like a sad song. "You called me with your repressed emotions, and now it is time to set yourself free." Each word felt like a tug at my heart, and memories of its life, of its loss, flooded my mind. I don't know how," I confessed, the anguish evident. "You must accept what happened," the entity insisted. "Only then can you find peace. Let go of the guilt, the pain. I am a part of you, and you are a part of me." The words echoed, and at that moment I realized that the entity was not just a ghost that appeared in my nightmares. It was the reflection of everything I had suppressed. The pain, the guilt, the sadness, all of it manifested in the figure before me. With a colossal effort, I began to remember happy moments with my wife and son. The laughter, the hugs, the hope that once existed. Each memory I had pushed away began to emerge, and the pain associated with them became lighter with each memory I brought to the surface. Tears streamed down my face as I let the sadness flow. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "I'm sorry for not being strong enough." The figure hesitated, and something changed in its expression. "Accept me, and together we can find freedom. You are not alone on this journey." Its presence became softer, almost maternal, and I realized that the figure was not a threat. It was a part of me that was desperately trying to be heard. In the instant I finally allowed the pain to flow, the mist around me began to dissipate. The figure seemed to glow, and the connection between us solidified. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift, and the feeling of freedom spread throughout my being. I accept, I declared, my voice firmer than ever. I accept what happened. I accept you. The words resonated in the space, and in response, the entity began to dissolve into a soft light, as if it were releasing the pain it had shared with me. The light enveloped the entire environment, filling it with warmth and a peace I had never felt before. The entity whispered a final thank you before disappearing completely, and with it, the darkness that surrounded me dissipated, giving way to serenity. I was alone now, but not in the same way. The weight of guilt had disappeared, and I realized that the true journey was just beginning. The road ahead was no longer a source of terror, but a path of hope and possibility. With a light heart, I knew I was ready to move forward. The light that had filled the room began to dissipate slowly, leaving a trail of warmth and comfort. The presence of the entity, which had once terrified me, now seemed to have transformed into something gentler, almost soothing. I was aware that I had faced not just a spirit, but also the demons I had nurtured over the years. The acceptance of pain and the release of guilt opened a new path before me. As the light faded, I realized that the road ahead was no longer a symbol of despair, but an invitation to start anew. With a new sense of purpose, I decided that I would not let the horrors of the past define my future. The A106, with its legends and mysteries, now became a space for healing and rebirth. As I drove back, the fog began to dissipate, revealing a starry sky I had never noticed before. The stars seemed to shine more brightly, as if they were applauding me for finally facing my fears. The weight I had carried disappeared, and the feeling of freedom was so intense that it almost made me cry. What had once seemed like a curse now became a testament to the resilience of life. I knew the journey would be long, and that the work of healing was not yet finished. But from that moment on, the road would not just be a path home, but a journey of self-discovery. I began to envision a future where I could speak about my experience, help others who feel lost and isolated, just as I had felt before. As I approached home, an idea took shape in my mind. I needed to share my story, not just as a warning, but as a message of hope. If you're watching this and have ever felt lost, know that you're not alone, I thought, imagining the possibility of touching other lives with my story. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this message. Together, we can face our fears and create a space of support and understanding. Remember, the road may be long, but you are never alone. With that thought, I drove back onto the road, feeling the cool night breeze and the freedom that came with acceptance. Life was a journey, and I was ready to face it, one day at a time.